This is the end of the year video that I'm going to be doing, and everybody else is going to be doing. Let's be real. I'm going to give you my top 10 books of the year. Of course, Rosalind is here. Of course, Rosalind is here. Can I help you? A lot of my favorite books have to do with grief and depression and mental illness, eating disorders, that kind of thing. Just a lot of mental health issues are really interesting to me, and I have quite a bit of books that have to do with grief. And I'm going to be reading some quotes about griefs too. So if that kind of thing is triggering to you, maybe don't watch this video just because we're going to be talking about grief a little bit. So I got my quotes here. So if I'm looking over here, that's because I'm reading quotes. Let's get started. These are going to be in a particular order, going from my least favorite to my most favorite. Most of these I rated 4 stars for one reason or another. And then 2 of the books I rated 5 stars. So, which is a rarity for me. I typically am pretty harsh when it comes to books. So, number 10 on my list would be God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This is a book that I read recently, actually. It is a story about a girl that goes missing at a summer camp who is the daughter of the owner of the camp itself. And it goes between that time period in the 70s, I believe, and goes back to the 60s where her brother ended up disappearing as well. It involves both what happens to the boy in the 60s and also to what happens to the girl in the 70s. And so it has a very satisfying conclusion, but it's really well written, and I didn't see the ending coming. This book also talks about loneliness and what it's like to be in a family that doesn't really understand you. And a couple of quotes from this one is book number 9. I actually don't have a copy of. I only have half of these books. I only own half of them. I have either donated them because I think somebody else might get a kick out of them, and I don't foresee myself rereading them just because the topics were a little too heavy. That they were beautiful when I read them, but I can't foresee myself going through that again. Or I got them from the library. Okay, book number 9 is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I know a lot of people have read this book. Everybody probably who has seen this has read this book. I am new to Frederick Bachman's work. I am probably going to read A Man Named Ova at some point, but I'm waiting for it to come into the library. So if you don't know, Beartown is about a small hockey town that basically their entire town revolves around these high school boys and their hockey team. That's where they get all their revenue. And basically, if they end up winning, they'll build a new hockey club and get maybe a professional team in there, and it's really good for the town. But then something horrible happens. There's a big incident, and it ends up tearing the town in two, and they end up taking sides, and it's a really brutal book. It's often really sad, and it made me very angry. This gives you an idea of what the book is about. It said she's 15, above the age of consent, and he's 17, but he's still the boy in every conversation. She's the young woman. Words are not small things. It's a really brutal book. I would check the trigger warnings before actually reading this book because it does go into detail about the incident that happens. So check the trigger warnings on all of these books, actually, because most of them are pretty brutal. Next book that I also don't have a copy of is All My Rage by Saba Tahir. This is a book about 2 friends, one of which is the child of an immigrant, and the other was born in Pakistan, I believe, and ends up immigrating with her uncle after a tragedy. And they both go to this school. They deal with a lot of racism and things like that. It basically has to do with the pressure that you have when your family has taken care of you or given you a better life, and the pressure you feel because of that. And also, this is another book that made me so angry. It also deals with grief, which is one of the reasons why it was one of my favorites of this year. One of the characters says, "I'll survive this, I'll live, but there's a hole in me never to be filled. Maybe that's why people die of old age. Maybe we could live forever if we didn't love so completely, but we do. And by the time our old age comes, we'll be filled with holes, so many that's too hard to breathe, so many that our insides aren't even ours anymore. We're just one big empty space waiting to be filled by the darkness, waiting to be free." That kind of gives you an idea of how deep this book goes. It's written really well, and you really sympathize with the characters and how they're trying to make better lives for themselves and how they're trying to basically pay back how they feel they need to pay back their family for doing all that they did to help them get a better life. So There's a lot of pressure to, follow in their family's footsteps. One wants to and one doesn't. One basically wants to leave the town forever and go to college, and the other one wants to keep this motel alive that their family ended up building basically on their own. The next book is called Message Not Found by Dante Moderna. This is a book about a girl who loses her best friend in a tragic accident. They're both high schoolers, and she ends up taking her friend's phone and emails and stuff and putting them into an AI program and basically creating an AI version of her friend to talk to. This book speaks a lot on grief, as most of these do, and how it feels to be left behind, and how you'll do anything to get to talk to that person once more, even if it's something that's not necessarily ethical. Like, she ends up stealing her friend's computer from her house, and ends up trying to get more and more information to put into this AI to basically keep her friend alive. Some quotes from this one. So I just wanted to let you know that even after everything, you were one of my life's best parts too. Hi, baby. There's another cat here. You gonna show your tail? Yes. The next book that I have is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. This is a story about a girl who is the daughter of an immigrant. She is a PhD candidate in neuroscience at Stanford, and she is basically studying how depression and addiction are affecting mice. And this is because her brother died of addiction, and her mother is living with her, basically too depressed to get out of bed. And so this affects her research and what she wants to study, because she wants to maybe not solve the problems, but she wants to understand them better and understand how this affects people and what could possibly a solution could be for it, because she's just been affected by these things so badly. And this one was really interesting because not only does it talk a lot about science and things like that, but it also talks a lot about faith, and how this character's faith basically disappears at a moment when her brother dies, and how faith and science interact. She grew up very, very religious, and her mother is still very religious. And so she's kind of grappling with the fact that she's not really religious anymore, but she still has these ideals that she grew up with the church. One quote from this one: "If I've thought of my mother as a callus, and many times I have, then it's important to remember what callus is, the hardened tissue that forms over a wound." One of the more comedic ones that I actually have is I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue. It's a story about a girl who's about to be fired from her office job, and she's kind of hated by her coworkers, and she's not a big fan of them either, until her HR department accidentally gives her access to every text and email that all the other coworkers have and send. So she basically gets all of this private information about all of her coworkers, and she tries to use that in order to keep her job. And it seems kind of like a silly concept, but it really goes deeper into the idea of you don't really know what people are going through, and that people can be hiding tragedy in their lives, and the hardships that they go through just because they don't know you very well and they have no reason to tell you. So she finds out all of these things about her coworkers and ends up becoming fond of them. The only quote I have of this one is, "I know what life I'm supposed to live. I have Pinterest. Obviously, this isn't it." The next one I have, if I can pick it up off the ground, is The Wedding People by Ashley Espedge. I don't know how to say her last name. I'm so terrible at names. This is a story about a woman who is going to a hotel by herself, one last extravagant vacation before she decides to end her life. She's in the middle of a divorce and all of these things that just make it so she doesn't want to live anymore. And it turns out that she's the only person at this hotel that is not an attendee of a wedding. And she ends up meeting the bride in an elevator. And because she has no reason to not tell her, she kind of doesn't really care anymore. She tells her that she's going to end her life. And the bride basically says, "Please don't do that." Not because she cares, but because she doesn't want her to ruin her wedding. I think this book does a really good job of going in between really serious topics and really funny topics, like the bride and this main character Phoebe strike up a friendship, and because they don't know each other and they don't particularly like each other very much, they're very honest. And the more they become friends, the less honest they want to be, because they suddenly care about hurting the other's feelings. So some quotes from this one: There's no such thing as a happy place, because when you're happy, everywhere is a happy place. And when you're sad, everywhere is a sad place. Or, which will one that'll probably be relatable to a lot of people, is yes, sometimes she reads too much. Sometimes she reads books instead of living a life. I think it ended up winning Goodreads Choice Awards, but I just loved how blunt the characters were with one another, and I love a book that's got depression in it. If the character is depressed, I'm like, sign me up. I'm here for it. The next book I have is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. I got this from the library, so I don't have a copy of this book. This is a book about two authors who had a romance back in high school for 7 days, and then something ended up going wrong, and they start writing about one another in each other's books. They reconnect at a conference. They're both on a panel for some writers, and they basically reconnect from there. And I am not a romance reader, which is how you know that this is a good book. It is a romance book. It's heavy on the romance, but at the same time, there's not a lot of smut to it. Like, there's some, but there's not a lot. And the relationship isn't easy. Like, the conflicts are real. Like, these characters go through a lot. They go through a lot of trauma. They go through a lot of things, and it ruins the relationship between the two of them. And they have to overcome not only the relationship issues that they have, but they also need to become better people in order to be with one another. So it's really good romance. It's probably my favorite romance that I've ever read. Both of the quotes I have from this book are both by Shane, who is the love interest in this book, and he just has some great one-liners. He says, "Girls are given the weight of the world, but nowhere to put it down." And he also says, "I idealize you in fiction because I idealize you in real life." The final book that I have, my favorite book of the year, and one of my favorite books of all time, would be Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi, which has a beautiful cover. It's wonderful. This is a book about two sisters who are kind of estranged at the beginning of the book. One is 3 years older than the other and seemingly has her life together, while the other one is struggling with an eating disorder and kind of living with a man who's not a great person and just kind of doesn't have her life together. And then the older sister is diagnosed with cancer. She doesn't have health insurance, and so she basically steals her sister's identity in order to get cancer treatment. One of the reasons I love this book so much is just that it's great at showing sibling dynamic. Like, these sisters do not like each other very much, and they have some throwdown fights, and they're brutally honest with one another. It's just fun to read, and it reminds me of me and my brother when we were younger. And they were really close when they were younger, so it kind of gives them the opportunity to be the antagonistic siblings that they never got the chance to be, because they immigrated together with their family from Seoul, I believe, to New York, and they finally get the chance to just be super mean to each other. And I think it's just a real honest look at siblings and how you can fluctuate between being really close and being far apart from each other, and how at the end of the day, you're still willing to question each other's life's choices because you're siblings, and that's just kind of the relationship you're supposed to have. And it kind of goes into how life doesn't stop when something tragic happens. So, like, your sister gets diagnosed with cancer and you just have to keep living your life. There's no, things don't stop just because something horrible happens. And I think it's a character study where not a lot of things happen, where these sisters, their relationships just change over time. And I think it's really beautiful. I think it's a lovely book. Read the trigger warnings on it, though. Quotes from this book. One of them is, "There was more than one type of perfectionist, and that I qualified because the kind of perfectionist I was the kind that abandoned everything if I wasn't good enough at it, and that's why I couldn't finish tasks." Which, if that's not relatable to you, we can't be friends, because that's who I am in a nutshell. I'm not perfect at something in the beginning, then I just stop. Those are my top 10 books of the year. Just taking a look at my books to see if maybe there's some honorable mentions of ones you might want to read. Definitely Our Wives Under the Sea would be on that list. That's just a creepy good time. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches is a very good time if you like The House on the Cerulean Sea but don't really agree with the author. This is a good alternative. Lonely Castle in the Mirror was a good one. It took me a while to get into that one just because it's slow going plot, but everything comes together in the end and it's wild. It's like one big plot twist. Before the Coffee Gets Cold, I've only read the first one, but it's sweet and sad and very good book. And I think that's it. I think that's all the ones I'm going to go over. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to let me know what your favorite books were down below, that would be wonderful because I'm always looking for new recommendations. And thank you so much for watching.